Thanks for tuning in, Mountaineer Nation. It's good to be back. Sorry I'm a few days late on this. It was the unofficial kickoff of the 2025 college football season earlier this week in Frisco, Texas for Big 12 Media Days. I would have liked to give you my initial recap thoughts earlier this week, but man, I got sick, y'all. So this is the first day that I've really felt well enough that I can talk for this long of a period of time. So I'm going to power through and do the best that I can for you because I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to tell you off the initial onset that I'm feeling feisty. So if you're ready for that kind of an episode to lock in, buckle your seatbelts, because I got a lot of thoughts and mostly directed at the leadership of this conference. But really much of a nothing burger, I feel like, for Big 12 Media Days. Nothing that was so earth-shattering. And a lot of things felt like sour grapes from the past pre-House settlement. That I know there's a lot going on in college sports right now. The House settlement finally coming to fruition. If you're reading about this SCORE Act that might be coming into play, that might be something we have to talk about down the road. Our college athletes, employees, and what does that look like, collective bargaining, all of those kinds of things. That's what I felt like, Big 12 Media Days. Can we put some of that aside and talk primarily about football? I know that, we want to talk about media rights and business partnerships, and all of those things have their place. But when we get to a media day, let's talk about actual football. Let's talk about the players. Let's talk about games. And I felt like that was kind of secondary. And that's why I'm saying I feel like this was a bit of a nothing burger. So from West Virginia's perspective, just kind of to tease the topics I want to talk about for today, kind of where does West Virginia rank in my preseason poll? Because directed from the leadership of this conference, there was not going to be a preseason poll. Did West Virginia have any players listed on the all Big 12 team? They had one. So we got to talk about him. No depth chart to talk about. Rich Rodriguez and the West Virginia staff are, wanting to be so clandestine and keep the cards so close to the vest that they are not going to give us any depth chart to even talk about and report on. So it won't really be until August 30th, and even then, probably not until September 13th will we have an actual two deep that we can report on more, and an actual game. And then some controversy surrounding 4 players who were not listed within the team's published media guide. So what does that mean about the future of their standing with the program? So we got, and then of course, head coach Rich Rodriguez, starting center, projected potential. That's what I'm going to have to say. Projected potential starting center, Landon Livingston. Projected potential defensive tackle, Edward Vesterinen. And projected potential wide receiver, Jaden Bray, representing West Virginia in Frisco, Texas, and some of the things that they had to say. So tune in. Thanks for tuning in to this another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. And we finally have something to talk about for this 2025 season with some new news. So first thing I really want to talk about, and this is where I'm going to start off, kind of big picture, looking at the Big 12 conference, and then I'll bring it back to, eventually talking about West Virginia, is how it all started off and why I'm now on the side of not liking more than liking Commissioner Brett Yormark. And for one thing, like the way it kicked off was it was recognizing all of the championships or high finishes for all of West Virginia sports teams. Of course, got to recognize Houston making the national championship game in basketball, Arizona, the NCAA tournament or College World Series in baseball, Arizona State winning the Big 12 football championship and being a play short from defeating Texas in the college football playoff. But then there were just so many different ancillary things, down to the talking about downhill skiing and beach volleyball. So what happened? That I'm like, what's your point here, Carson? West Virginia wasn't mentioned as a rifle national champion. So, again, just bringing more. I know this is just like, really, that's it. A hair follicle. But that's the thing, is West Virginia is this eastern frontier, forgotten about program in this Midwestern Great Plains Rocky Mountains Conference. Just another piece of evidence for it. That, we're just forgotten about. Oh yeah, West Virginia's in this league. Not going to mention their championship in rifle, but we're going to talk about beach volleyball and downhill skiing. So didn't like that was forgotten about. One of the things I do like, and I mentioned this on the co-episode that I did with Justin Coos Walker over at Coos' Corner, is I think all of the moves that Commissioner Yormark has made up to this point, especially in terms of conference realignment and the media rights deals, were necessary. First of all, adding the 4G, I think this, was done before his time, but, ushering in Cincinnati, South Florida, Houston, and BYU, 4 G6 programs that really at that point in time were probably the most sought after programs. With the recent success in football that Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati had, making the college football playoff. And then, BYU being a former national champion, huge brand out there in those Rocky Mountain states, national brand, big stadium. They have their own following. So I think that was just but weren't part of a conference and independent at the time. Good additions for that moment. And then with West Virginia, or the Big 12, losing Texas and Oklahoma, and then destabilizing the Big 12 or Pac-12, which really it was the Big 10, but Big 12 got the blame for it. I felt like, just because of the rivalry that George Kliavkoff and Brett Yormark had publicly, but it was the Big 10 that really destabilized the Pac-12, took its top 2 or 4 brands in USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon, and West Virginia, or Big 12, took over the 4 corner schools in Colorado, Utah, and the 2 Arizona schools. So it's like all those moves needed for the Big 12 survival, and then bringing in, securing a new media rights deal with ESPN, with Fox Sports. Now they're bringing on Turner, everything he's doing with, partnerships with Venmo and PayPal, the WWE. All of that I like. All of that is the kind of, cutting around the edges that to make few more million bucks here and there to try and keep up with this, the SEC and the Big Ten, the behemoth conferences of the sport. Like, you need that. And that, thankfully, West Virginia, third time I've done that now. The Big 12 has a champion in Yormark as its commissioner to go out there and cut business deals. So that is why he was hired, and that is why he continues to excel. But now it's reached a tipping point, and where the Big 12 does not have the cards, neither does the ACC. They pretty much relinquished power to the SEC and the Big Ten on making unilateral decisions that affect all of college football. So they got afraid, for whatever reason, that the SEC and the Big Ten was going to break away from the sport and cause a whole dramatic shift. And that still could very well come. So it's like the SEC and the Big Ten hold the guillotine over college sports of whenever they want to finally use that power and force their kind of breakaway. But I don't know, just living in your fears day in and day out is not the way that I like to live. Thankfully, I've never been put in that kind of a situation. But it's just now they're making decisions that I think now the last bastion of holdout, and this is what you're feeling, and this was, I feel like, the whole theme of Media Day, and all of the news that came out from Big 12 Media Day was overshadowed because of this one component, was Yormark standing apparently on behalf of the ADs in the Big 12, that the Big 12 wants a 5-11 college football playoff model. And this, if you've listened to some other national shows, Josh Pate at his college football show that I listen to very frequently has argued, I don't think that this is a good move at all, and this could be really undoing of all of the good that Brett Yormark has done to this point in time. And, a little bit of Bob Bowlesby with, on his way out and how they were able to survive once Texas and Oklahoma decided they were going to leave for the SEC, the, unforgivable sin that's affected college sports downstream. This 5-11 format, like, if ESPN runs the playoff, so you don't think that we're going to get this same kind of thing that we've gotten for years, that all of their media puppets are going to pump this propaganda that the SEC is the most deserving all of the time because of the schedules they play, and they're not going to swallow up half or more of those at-large playoff spots? I just think you're foolish. Now, do I think the 4-4-2, 2-2-1, whatever it is much better? Because again, at that point in time, you're just handing it over to the SEC. In Big Ten, you're bending to the knee to them, pretty much admitting that you all are stronger than us. So you are more deserving of these automatic qualifying spots? No, but I think at that point in time, this argument of wanting to earn it on the field, we don't need a professional model, we're not the NFL, we're college football and we must act like it. What the hell does that even mean? I'm sorry, but propaganda and politicking on behalf of your team has been in the essence of college football for over 100 years. I mean to tell you, people, if you don't know history for more than 5 to 10 seasons, I think you need to keep it to yourself and let people who know more about the sport talk. I mean, are we really forgetting that in 1993, West Virginia was an undefeated team and got passed over for a Florida State to play for a national championship? Or how about just 2004, Auburn getting passed over undefeated to play for a national championship, instead USC, and then the BCS, the end of the BCS era, 2011, Alabama and LSU, or 2014, Baylor and TCU don't get into the newly established 4-team playoff, or 2023, Florida State getting passed over, undefeated conference champion. There is always been this, I'll just say it, political propaganda, media propaganda push. It's almost like how many, people on a network can you bigwigs to try and push for your team? I mean, look what happened to West Virginia this past basketball season and getting pushed out for North Carolina. These bigger brands who the TV networks want to see in these spots, if it is between a West Virginia or a North Carolina in basketball, as we saw this past season, they will push for a North Carolina. So why, oh why, if you're the Big 12 and you have all of these middle class programs, middle tier kind of, are you just going to say, oh yeah, we want the 8-4, 9-3, so 6 to 7 SEC teams? I'm looking at the preseason polls of how many good teams that the SEC is going to have. You're just going to hand them that model? I just think this is so stupid. Why are you just standing on this as your final flag that you want to sink with the ship? Just get over it, or propose some sort of other model. Again, this all goes back to my model, is I don't think that we need conferences, or as we know them today. We need new divisions without programs, especially the G6 programs. We need a whole new classification, and we need somewhere between 40 to 60 teams. And those are the teams, if you make up new divisions with more conference/rivalry, regionality, that all, one get some sort of automatic qualifying spot, and you come up with different ways based upon their record. It's very similar to the NFL in a way. It really is. I mean, a lot of coaches said this at media days, that there's a lot from the NFL that we can take so that we can get a lot of this, again, politicking and propaganda, from the media out of college football to try and really do determining out on the field. But if you're going to go to a 5-11 model with the way college football is now, sayonara. You're signing that over to the SEC and, especially the Big Tens, like second tier, if you want to call it that. You're signing those rights to those spots over to them, where half of the 16 teams, oh my gosh, I would say 2/3 are going to be the SEC and Big Ten at that point in time. So good luck. I don't think that's the right move. I don't. And I disagree with Ren Baker on this as well when I heard that on the Three Guys Before the Game podcast. The few other things I didn't like about what Big Commissioner Yormark said, and it was, I think, in his Q&A. For one, it was a guy, I think, from Utah asked this question. I do believe that long term we need certain schools to emerge to the top. I'm focusing in on the word certain there. What does that mean? I'm sorry, but for as long as West Virginia's been in this conference was notorious, and still is in basketball, especially with Kansas still around. Conference is notorious, I feel like, for favoritism of the Blue Bloods. First Oklahoma, Texas sprinkle in here and there, and I think primarily due to the horns down flag. But I'll go back to how egregiously that 2018 game was called at DK Royal Stadium. We don't need that. We don't need that to me sounds like favoritism in the form of officiating. We don't need certain schools to emerge to the top. Yes, you do when you're in this same kind of argument, in boat where annually the superpowers in college football. In the Big Ten, it's now, emerged. It's Ohio State, it's Michigan, now Oregon, to a certain extent, Penn State I'll put up there because they've now, jumped up a level from the early stages of the James Franklin era. And then in the SEC, of course, your Alabama, your LSU, now Texas, Oklahoma, Florida. So, yes, I get, and in the ACC, of course, Clemson stuck around. Miami's kind of being a mainstay, even though they've never won the conference. That's funny to me. They haven't won a conference championship since they were back in the Big East. So that's hilarious. But I get what he's saying is you sometimes need perennial powers in the sport, like a Kansas basketball has, so that you can kind of count them in the national conversations. Think like, oh yeah, that team could contend on the same playing field as the best team from the SEC. So I get what he's trying to say, but to me that sounds as if like we're trying to identify these players who are going, or teams who are going to rate well on TV, who have these big collective or athletic revenue, war chests that'll be able to recruit with some of these bigger teams and bigger conferences. So we need them eventually to step up to the plate and, spearhead the flag of the Big 12 conference. And I don't like that because West Virginia has not been afforded that I don't want to say that opportunity. And I'm not going to be hypocritical here. West Virginia has not won enough of significant, especially in football of ranked matchups as part of the Big 12, to be out one of these teams that should argue. I made a video about this a year or so ago about how they're fighting with some other programs to be that climber to the top of Mount Everest of the Big 12 conference and to champion that flag. Instead, it's like this crab pot of everybody's trying to, nip at each other's heels as they try and scale another 10 feet, and they're bringing the conference collectively down, even though there's such great parity, between teams 1 through 10, for example, maybe even, 1 through 16, but that you don't see, Wake Forest is always going to lose to a Clemson. You finally saw it after 60 some years, Vanderbilt beating Alabama, or Rutgers ever beating Ohio State. That's what you have in those other conferences. There's programs that are never going to compete for a national and win a conference championship. So I don't even understand the point of some of their positioning within those conferences. So that's what I mean. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see favoritism shown to certain, in Brett Yormark's words, certain schools out there, because, again, in a league in which West Virginia is seemingly forgotten about at every chance or opportunity for the Big 12 to show that it cares about the schools in the Eastern time zone, it doesn't. One other thing, Yormark said, I want this conference to be a global conference. No. This is about as American of a sport as we have in this country, because now that big baseball's ruined because of no salary cap and the competitive balance is absolutely terrible. College football is like America's sport. I'm sorry, but I just don't see very many, fans in Mexico or fans in Canada or fans in Ireland going I'm sorry, this game that's happening this first week in Dublin, Ireland, between Kansas State and Iowa State. Are you kidding me? Come on. I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to scrounge up some fans from overseas or same see in the case of Canada and Mexico, and try and find these international audiences to become fans of these certain schools or clubs, sports teams in America in football. No, that's the NFL. I can see that in the NFL, and I think the Jacksonville Jaguars have done a really good done with this. But that's not college football. It's supposed to be played on campuses. I'm with some of the other national commentators. Sometimes these week one neutral site kickoff games are stupid to me. If you want to play two Southern schools in Atlanta, Georgia for the Chick-fil-A kickoff, okay, makes a little more sense. But why the hell is Kansas State and Iowa State getting sent over to Dublin, Ireland for this game? I just don't see. If West Virginia ever loses a home game at Milan Puskar Stadium to go play in Ottawa or Mexico City or Rome, Italy, I'm going to be heated and you're going to hear about it. So I think it's just counterintuitive or not advantageous for West Virginia when its commissioner wants this to be the global conference. I'm sorry. So, and then just the last thing I'll say is his tagline, the Big 12 remains open for business. I just kind of feel as if he's a bit of a short stack poker player here. It's just unnecessary to throw this in there. It made a little more sense, whenever he first started. Yeah, and I love all of these ancillary business decisions that he's making. The Venmo move, the TNT bringing them on as an outside partner if he doesn't want to see West Virginia or the Big 12 conference in bed with ESPN, which is in bed with the SEC, and Fox is in bed with the Big 10. So if TNT becomes a legit third party, third media partner that can pay the same kind of money that these other conferences are getting, I'd love for the Big 12 to be connected to TNT at that point in time. Fine. That's cool with me. But the open for business almost has this connotation to it that the Big 12 still going poaching. And I'm sorry, give up the whole we're going to go get UConn thing. UConn is not a football power. Never has been, never will be. I know you love the New York market, Brett Yormark, and I know you want to sell the TV rights deals separately for basketball than you do for football, but now is not the time for that. The move still has been and still will be is to keep your eyes and be ready to pounce on the ACC if it implodes or falls apart, or conference all these teams start to pull out and dissolve their grant of rights because it comes cheap enough for them to do so. But then that's when we're going to have the great reset of college sports at that period of time. West Virginia's one hope, I feel like, is getting to the SEC, or it's staying in the Big 12 and hoping that ACC schools that are West Virginia's geographical traditional rivals join the league, and they're able to form a new division, and that's who they mostly play. That's what I've been standing on for over, like 2 years now, and that's what I'll continue to stand on. So this remaining open for business, who are you going to go poach? Memphis? Who are you going to go poach? Tulane? Boise State? So stop. I just move on. Go to something else at this point in time. So I know that's very down. That's very secondary. It's really this college football playoff model that I think has the hugest impact on the current and next iteration of what the Big 12 looks like in college football as a whole. But I just didn't like much of any of that. And now I'm kind of just on this side of like, yeah, Yormark's there, but I'm very fishy. I'm just very fishy of what's his next move and how does West Virginia vote as part of the Big 12 majority coalition. Or can he just continue to cut these kind of ancillary deals, and that's where I kind of like the lane that he would stay in. Because the Big 12 does not hold the chips right now. It does not against the SEC and the Big 10. So to go out there, it just kind of seems a little bit little brother to try and go out there and, having all this firepower and, we shouldn't bend the knee to. But I get it. It's a very ego-driven sport, and he does not want to bend the knee to them what does it say if you go the opposite way? And again, give the power over to the SEC and the Big 12 with those automatic qualifying sports. So what I have to say is propose a better idea. If neither of these two models are good enough, then what is your better plan? So I'll move on. We'll leave it at that. Another thing I'm feisty about and peeved about. No preseason poll dictated by Yormark and others. And I don't think it was necessarily him specifically, but he had to officially give the okay on it that there was no preseason poll. I think that's how I'm going to finish off this video because I kind of want to talk about some West Virginia things first and then kind of end that because I think that's where I'll get the most out of this video. Really happy for Jahiem White being named on the preseason All Big 12 list. Only one team for that, so he alongside Bryson Washington of Baylor were named the two running backs within this league. So happy for them. I think it was just because there was a lot of running back talent that left or left out of eligibility or off to the NFL. So makes sense for them on paper preseason. Both the best two returners. So a lot to prove from some of these other schools out there. But for right now, Jahiem White, Bryson Washington, definitely deserving. The other thing, no WVU depth chart. So again, we're just going to have to speculate up until fall camp starts, through fall camp. Keep your eyes close to your Twitter feeds and all the articles that are posted by the different outlets. I'm sure this will be closed off, very little information being put out to the public because again, Rich Rodriguez wants this team shrouded and clouded in secrecy. So I don't know what to say. I think the biggest news that came out of this, honestly, I think it was first mentioned by Chris Anderson over at 247 Sports, that Jamori Robinson, Jeff Weimer, Justin Harrington, and now Ty Edwards were not listed within the media guides. And might be that we might not see them in a Mountaineer uniform if their waivers are denied by the NCAA. And we know because the NCAA hates West Virginia because of Sean Alston and Raekwon Battle and, going to fight against the NCAA because of those two student athletes that the NCAA is not going to give West Virginia any benefit of the doubt ever. Especially now with Governor Morrissey's whole, we're going to go and do an investigation against the NCAA and its selection committee for the NCAA tournament. So if West Virginia loses Jamori Robinson, that might be the difference in a win or loss for this season. I'm just going to put it right there. I think he and, Michael Coates are probably the two. Michael Coates, Cam Vaughn, 3 most important impact transfer prospect, or transfer players into the program for this season. So that's huge. I think the other 3, West Virginia can find ways, again, because we don't know necessarily as much about the defensive backs and the wide receivers just yet. And at running back, with the addition of Jalen Knighton, West Virginia can kind of make it work, I feel like, with its stable of backs. So Ty Edwards is a nice to have in short yardage goal line situations, but nobody out of this transfer class can replace the kind of pass or what West Virginia was bringing back on the defensive line can make the kind of impact that a conference defensive player of the year from UTSA, Jamori Robinson, can. You have to have him. That's going to be huge. The impact that he can make from a pass rushing perspective to get sacks, quarterback hits, rushes, all of that, you got to have him. So I don't know what Rich Rodriguez, Ren Baker, new president Michael Benson needs to do, but I mean, to tell you, if you can only have one of 4, that's the one you need to have. You want to have the most. So, oh man, that is something to track. I feel like from now until kickoff of the season, what's the status of Jamori Robinson? And he needs to be, yes, thankfully, he was out on the field for spring practice, but don't get him in, for week 1 of kickoff and have him miss all of August camp not practicing or something like that. So this is a very tenuous situation, one that's worthy of tracking. So if we would have had a depth chart, I would have gone through, as I've done through in the last 2 years, I would have gone through and kind of talked about, at each position group. So I think I'm going to save that. I think I'm going to bring back what I did last year and do this for, videos this week. Do an offensive side of the ball breakdown, defensive side of the ball breakdown, look at it holistically, then from each position groups within offense versus defense. So I think I'm going to save that for a different video and not talk about it in terms of Big 12 Media Day. Also, things from hearing from the players and same from Coach Rodriguez, I think the overall theme that I heard, because we didn't really, didn't get much into specifics about this team. A little bit about quarterback. I think it was interesting that he's saying how many quarterbacks that he's comfortable with. How comfortable he is with playing so many different players, upwards of like 80 players that he hopes to see. See starting time this season. But I think overall, and I know this has been said by so many coaches at so many different programs nationwide, that's basically become cliche, is culture. We've been ripping this since December, whenever he was hired. Is that the old mentality under former head coach Neil Brown and his staff needed to go. The type of reactionary play to what is dictated by the opponent, rather than assert your will and be aggressive on both the offensive and defensive side of the balls, that is out. And we're going back to what is formerly known as the hard edge mentality with the earned success model. So how that's going to impact, recruiting and retention and everything down the road, that's to talk about at a later date. For right now, scouting well, and how you do that in the and how he has and the staff has done this in such the transactional, era that in which we live, and still lived at that point in time pre-house settlement date. Very curious to see how this team gels, because the way I see this team can go is one of 2 ways. It's like, they're going to start to win, they're going to have the buy-in, they're going to gel at these different groups, or by the aggregate of total volume, West Virginia can plug and play at different places. If one part out of the whole isn't playing up to potential, I'm looking at defensive back, I'm looking at wide receiver, you can go everywhere. And they're going to make it work that way. But again, and you can win that way, and I hope West Virginia does secure a lot of wins, and we could see this team potentially turn out like an Indiana this past year. Or there will be, I don't want to say infighting, but it's like there's a lot of guys who have 1 year's worth of eligibility left on this team, and they want to see the field. They don't want to just stand on the sidelines and cheer on, you do want to cheer on your teammates. But that's not the reason why they chose West Virginia. They chose West Virginia to play. And if you're not going to play, you want to be on a winning team. So if you're not on a winning team and you're not playing, the other route is the Florida State this past year, in which they just completely imploded, spiraled, and finished 2-10. So I don't want to fall that way. And if you can't have what Indiana did, I'd like somewhere kind of in between. So that's where I'm very curious to see. But and West Virginia does have some talent, which I'll talk about when I talk about the preseason poll. But that's where what Rodriguez was talking about, the cultural stability, program building, that, the out with the old. And, unfortunately, West Virginia lost some talented players to the transfer portal through this whole process. We know who those guys are. But now he's trying to reestablish what he tried to establish and successfully did in the early 2000s. So it might just take time. Where I don't know where I love the confidence. Truly, I do love the conference. I think Mountaineer Nation does too. Is he's being bold. He said on record that if West Virginia isn't still in contention for a Big 12 championship come November, then he feels as if this is a failure of a season. Whereas I think if you want to be a little more realistic, a little more honest, you can say, hey, I think he has done this to a certain extent, but just, again, Rodriguez, ego guy, he's not going to admit any sort of lack of ability or anything. He's going to try and compete and try and outwork and outcoach, and that's, something that I really respect and genuinely love about the guy, professionally, is that West Virginia might just take time. It might be a year where we do some really nice things. We, have some players emerge, step up to the plate. I'd love it if those guys are guys who have eligibility for 2026. But it's just going to kind of take time for them to gel together, figure it out. And if it means, say anywhere between a 4-8 to 6-6, 7-5 season, but man, West Virginia lays some awesome groundwork. It kind of feels as if it's like 2020 with the 2020 West Virginia team kind of on the rise, doing some really nice things to then go and compete legitimately for a championship in 2026, conference championship. I'll take it. And that's kind of where my head is at for this season. So why don't we just get into it? Let's talk about this preseason poll. And if you've seen some of the preseason polls, from other people out there, you're seeing West Virginia being picked 16th, 14th. I got my Lindy's magazine right here in front of me from what I was reading over the summer, and I just don't see it. So I might be the most optimistic, even though of what you've just heard from me for the past couple of minutes sounds a little more pessimistic. But here's why: there is some good. I feel like 1 through 5, 6. That teams I feel like can all win the league. Then I think there's kind of a middle tier. There might even be 4 tiers. So I might go out on a limb here and say there's only 5 teams that can win a Big 12 championship. There are 2-3 teams that could go one way or the other, compete still for a championship, or fall to this middle of the pack. Then, kind of middle of the pack, and 4 teams I just don't believe in. And I kind of think are going to still fall in the bottom quarter of the league. So first and foremost, Arizona State, look at their, returning production, 17 starters from a team that won the conference championship a year ago. I think they kind of were a year ahead, peaked a little early, had a lot of things come together. Kenny Dillingham, I think, ignited a program that was kind of, just wandering in the wilderness. Didn't have really much of an identity, and established that with Cam Scadaboo. Now he's gone. So how will they determine it on the ground? I think that means that they're going to have to go more air. So Sam Leavitt, one of the top returning quarterbacks in college football for this season, going to be throwing it up to Jordan Tyson a whole lot, I feel like, this year. So very interesting to see. And where I'm going with this from a power rating, because rankings mean a whole lot different to me. Rankings are, subjectively your eye test, which is secondary to what is the strength of your record, of your resume. How many ranked wins did you have at the time, or if they weren't a ranked win at the time that eventually turned out by the end of season was a really good win. And then, versus your losses, how many in totality, and then subjectively secondary, what's the strength of your roster? Statistically, can you, that eye test. So rankings versus a power rating, I feel like just on what you have on paper. And I think the only place that it makes sense is in the offseason. So once week 1 or even week 0 kicks off, boop, throw those out the window. This does not mean a damn thing once rankings come into play. Now, you can't accurately rank, I feel like, until you're about midway through the season. We still got to do it for context and for fun. So this is a great place to start, I feel like, is your returning production, your coaching prestige, your recruiting, both high school and transfer portal, etc. So for right now, this could be totally off, but for right now on paper, what's coming in, I think Arizona State has the most firepower right now because of what they were able to do in 2024 and what they're bringing back for 2025. So really like that team. Number 2, Texas Tech. So they won the offseason. They were the ones who spent $20 million allegedly in the transfer portal to go get some of these guys out there, doing it primarily on the offensive or on the defensive lines. David Bailey, Romello Height. And then on the offensive line, went and got some big names as well. Still have Baron Morton to come back. I'll be very interesting to see how they replace Taj Brooks, the program's all-time leading rusher. For as much as they are an air raid team, they sure did love the ball to run the ball over West Virginia, while Taj Brooks was in the backfield for them. So I think you can make that argument for them being number 1, just along the same as Arizona State. But for right now, a team that went 8-5 still a year ago, to say they should on paper jump Arizona State, I just can't go there right now. But very well could be playing for a conference championship come the end of the season, and I think they kind of expect that down there in Lubbock for how much money they spent. So number 3, Kansas State. I think like Coach Kleiman's awesome. I think he's kind of one of the most underrated coaches in college football. Has just already won a Big 12 championship game for Kansas State. And how many years has he been there now? 6 years. So hired at the same time as Neil Brown, and we see where Neil Brown is and where Chris Kleiman is. 48-28. So look at that record during his time, and really took understanding kind of the identity of Kansas State, Bill Snyder style football, and acknowledging we're not the sexiest program in college football, but we're going to win and we can still get good players. So had Will Howard for a time, now have Avery Johnson. They've had good quarterback play, good running backs, and a solid defense. And I'm looking at this team. Yeah, you lose DJ Giddens, who was a horse for you, rushing for over 1,300 yards last season, but they kept Dylan Edwards. They kept Jace Brown, who I might be wrong on this, but I think flirted with the transfer portal. If Avery Johnson can just cut down on some of the mental mistakes that he makes, turnovers, and then might have been nicked up this past year at times of wanting to play from within the pocket, where I think he's just one of the most lethal, versatile options in college football when he can run the ball too, or run the ball more than he does for Kansas State. Looking at his totals last year, only 605 rushing yards, whereas a Devin Dampier, I know at New Mexico, so Mountain West versus the Big 12, ran for over 1,000. I mean, that tells me he's rushing for about 50 yards a game. I feel like Avery Johnson should be pushing closer to 100 yards a game, rushing in Kansas State's offense, but. Neither this nor that, but I like what they have coming back as well. 12 starters, 6 offense and 6 defense being back. I could very well see them being the number 1 team in the Big 12 by the end of the season, or you could even argue for them being number 1 right now. Here's where I had trouble. Coin flip between Iowa State and Baylor. I really like what Baylor was able to do come the end of the year. I think that game in Morgantown, specifically what I saw out of Sawyer Robertson and the game scheming, game planning, offensive play calling by Jake Spavital. He was great during his time with Dana Holgerson in Morgantown. Had a lethal combination with Will Grier and David Sills. And now Baylor has different options. They can have a run game with Bryson Washington, and Robertson is the unquestioned now starter. He's got a cast of wide receivers that he can throw to, so I like where their offense is. And I know I have Iowa State ranked 4th, but I want to talk a lot about Baylor because for 5, because I think it's just a coin flip between the two of them. And then defensively, we know Keaton Thomas is a stud. Where else are their playmakers? So that's why I give the edge when comparing the two of them by a hair to Iowa State. Is I like Iowa State's defense a little bit more. Just being able to corral West Virginia's offense, keep them contained for 4 quarters last year in Morgantown. I think that said a lot. Yeah, they had a lot of losses on the defensive side of the ball, still just 4 returners on that side of the ball. But John Haycock knows what he's doing with that system, and Matt Campbell. And as long as you still have Rocco Bacht, who might be the most sound quarterback within this league. Not the flashiest, not the biggest arm, but he is a playmaker. Oh my gosh. I thought that win in Morgantown said so much about his character, the feistiness, how he's a competitor, he's a gamer. Now, they got railroaded in the Big 12 championship game. So, does that cap the potential for Iowa State as a program or a team in 2025 because you're losing Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins? I mean, losing those 2 receivers is why I can't put them within the top 3. I don't know if they have the offensive firepower right now in the passing game, but I believe that the Rocco Bacht is going to be able to make his receivers better, kind of like how Tom Brady did with the New England Patriots for so many years. So I'll put Iowa State above a Baylor right now. But, that will be a really good game if those two let me look at the schedule real quick. No, they don't play each other, but I would love to see the two of them meet. 6th right now, TCU. This was a team that I think overachieved in 2024. Kind of out of nowhere, I feel like, and it was because Josh Hoover asserted himself, one of the nation's best in passing. It was a program that was 8th in the nation last year at 313 yards per game through the air. Now, they only have 4 on the offense coming back of returning starters, but I think they're – and the other thing I'll say about TCU, why I don't put them in any higher, is looking at their schedule from last year. They didn't beat SMU, somehow had a loss at home to UCF, lost to Houston, lost at Baylor by just 3, but still finished, again, 9-4, beat Louisiana in the New Mexico Bowl. So I don't want to be too bullish on TCU. Is this like a West Virginia from 2023 where they just took advantage of a weak schedule? Or is this team for real and ready to contend for a conference championship? So that's where I think Tier 2 starts. So Tier 1 are those 5 teams. I think this is where Tier 2 kind of starts, where I'm like, I don't know if you're a part of Tier 1 or you should really be a part of Tier 3 just yet. Because, 11, 4 offense, 5 defense. But there are some talent. How is Bud Clark still with TCU? How does he still have years worth of eligibility? And I think Devin Deal at linebacker is a real one. So I like this where TCU is right there, and I think that's going to be a tough game in Morgantown, what's going to be a homecoming game for the Mountaineers. So then I have BYU, and why they're down this far is because of the loss of Jake Retzlaff withdrawing from school. It's just kind of an unfortunate situation, if you want to call it that, if you're hardcore conservative standing by the honor code there with BYU, but not seeing him probably for any school this year. I'm sure he's just probably going to red shirt train kind of this year, try and find a landing spot for 2026. So for BYU to not have him for 2025, throwing together a new starter at BYU this quickly. I think that's really going to hurt, in addition to some of the other losses that BYU had. Keelan Marion being a big name returner that they lost to Miami. Crew Wakely in the secondary. West Virginia was going after him, but he ultimately chose Purdue. I know that's on the defensive side of the ball. So they still got Chase Roberts at wide receiver, like them. LJ Martin did a good job for them last year at running the ball. I know they were terrible in 2023 at running the ball. So this was a team that had a lot of things come together for them until they met Kansas, and derailed into an 11-2. That's still a great season. 11-2 season that only ended up with an Alamo Bowl victory. I know they would have liked to play for the college football playoff, didn't make the Big 12 championship game. So now losing Retzloff, how far do they slide? So this is where I kind of consider them part of this other tier. The other program is Utah. I don't know really what to make. Some people, like a Bud Elliott out there, or I think even the either FanDuel rankings or Vegas odds have Utah as the winner of the Big 12 conference. I don't know, man. I don't know how you can go for a program that had 7 Big 12 losses in a row. Only beat Oklahoma State. I know this was at the point in time where the wheels weren't about to fall off just yet for Oklahoma State, but only beat them by 3. So I know there were a lot of losses, injuries, and I know it primarily had to do because of, what's the quarterback? The old guy. I could just now refer to him as the old guy. I forget his name off the top of my head. But the quarterback that they lost for pretty much the entire season, injuries unfortunately succumbed the end of his Utah Cam Rising's career. Man, but I watched that Colorado game, and they just could not move the ball offensively whatsoever. But I love what they're bringing back this year on their offensive and defensive lines. Why I don't pick them higher, again, what they suffered in 2024. And while they did go out there, bring in a new offensive coordinator, bring in a Devin Dampier to kind of establish a run game again, is how much more does Kyle Whittingham have in the tank? I thought it was very odd. What was it, this time last summer, or maybe even a little bit before the summer, that he announced a coach in waiting? I think if you already have your eyes set on being out the door, you're more leaning toward that way than you are about staying. So, is this his last hurrah? Is this his one last year? I know Utah, at least from their fan perspective on social media, isn't the most thrilled fan base to be in the Big 12 conference. Does he want to try and go elsewhere? Does he want to retire? I just don't know where that program's head is at. And is it right now winning the league? And looking at some of their, I think this defense was a defense that still finished 25 in the country. Again, that was with no offense. So I think that their defense will be just as good, if not better, if their offense can be a little more balanced and, not keep them on the field so much. So that's where I think 8th is kind of a good spot to pick them right now, as a program that could, finish among the top 5, top 4. But I just can't tell right now, again, because of how far they fell in 2025. And I know they were only 1 win short of becoming bowl eligible, but just becoming bowl eligible for a program like Utah, that is not something that they are used to. That is not. They are much better. We went through the numbers in that video I talked about for the future Big 12 conference contenders. It was like Oklahoma State, Utah, right there, who had the best chance alongside West Virginia for taking the mantle, then K-State, for the future of this conference. So let's see. What is the motivating factor for Utah this year in the post-Cam Rising era? Now with Devin Dampier going to be, kind of trying to run wild with a big-time offensive line in front of you. So those are the teams that I now pick in front of West Virginia. So this is where I put West Virginia 9th. And you're like, whoa. And it's really because of the teams that I'll talk about below them, where I think West Virginia has better odds, or, a better team than they do. So moving on, I'll come back to West Virginia, and I'm probably going to bring them up in all of the challenging against these other teams of Kansas. West Virginia beat Kansas. I know a game was in Morgantown, but West Virginia beat them. Do you really believe in Jaden Daniels after you saw from that game and the season that he had last year? I just think like that year away from football, the injuries that he's had. He's played a lot of football and spent a lot of time in college. And is he just trying to cash NIL checks? I know they came on strong at the end of last year, but then we talked about last year. He was losing his top 3 wide receivers, losing his top tight end. Devin Neal's off to the NFL. I know you kept Highshaw, but I just think that Kansas is going to have to rebuild their offense. Yeah, you kept your mainstay and your quarterback, but I just and then their defense is just average. So I think like West Virginia will have a very comparable team between the two of them. And now that's why I picked them 10th. West Virginia 9th. I think those 2 games are going to be huge for West Virginia, Kansas and Utah. And I know they come kind of almost in back-to-back weeks. No, they do come in back-to-back weeks. Kansas on the road, Utah at home. That's going to be pivotal as West Virginia is still going to try and figure out what does it have with this roster. It's too deep. It's offensive system, getting everybody in order. So that's why I kind of picked these 3 teams all alongside each other because those 2 games, of course, Pitt's going to be the most meaningful, impactful game for this entire season in which way it goes. But if West Virginia ends up winning the backyard brawl, can it do like it did in 2023 and then continue to rack up 2 wins like it did against TCU and Texas Tech and do that to Utah and Kansas in back-to-back weeks? Woo! We might be talking about a whole different season for these Mountaineers. That's huge. So then moving on to Colorado and why I can't pick Colorado higher than West Virginia is because I think Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter meant everything to this Colorado team and program. How quiet Colorado has been all offseason. I think a lot's going on behind the scenes that the national media doesn't necessarily know about. Now, and they only have 4 recruits for next year's recruiting class as of right now. I think I checked this like last week or so, but like, what are they doing for their future recruiting? Is Deion Sanders still going to be the coach? I think that's always going to be the kind of the question mark. What does he want to do? Now, they brought in Kaidon Salter from Liberty, who I think is a really good quarterback, especially at the G5, G6 level. And then they got a 5-star quarterback, true freshman. I think they're gelling a little bit more on the offensive line. Saw that this past season. But they still didn't run the ball a whole lot. So do they want to run the ball more, or do they want Kaidon Salter to be more of a pass-first quarterback like Shedeur Sanders was and try and throw the ball 60 times a game? So that's a little bit of an identity, I feel like, shift that I do think that Colorado was awesome at rushing the passer this past season, but they lost a lot of those guys. And they didn't go whole hog in the transfer portal like a Texas Tech did this year. So I don't know. Like, are they happy with what they have? Or, like, are they just, like, content with, just being average? Or, like, the only possibility for Colorado to turn the page was, into a conference championship winning program was while Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter were there. So now is Deion, looking is Florida State going to be firing Mike Norvell, and that's where he's headed? Or does he want to go off to the NFL? Or does he just want to retire and go back to TV because now Shedeur's in the league? I don't know. I don't know what to make of Colorado. So just got to kind of wait and see. 7 returners from that program. But I like some of the players that they do have at different positions. So like Samuel Akunla on the defensive line, Jordan Seaton especially at left tackle, only a sophomore, former 5-star. We'll just have to see. Cincinnati, again, I just don't buy Cincinnati. They've only beaten West Virginia, I think, twice there in all of the 2 or 3 times. I remember that 2003 year. That was before Cincinnati was in the Big East. And then, of course, the Tony Pike, Zach Collaros years there with Brian Kelly. But West Virginia, Cincinnati could have taken their shot at West Virginia this past year when they played them in Cincinnati, and West Virginia was kind of struggling at that point in time. Nico Marchiol didn't play his best game, but they just pissed down their leg. Brendan Sorsby with his turnovers, and West Virginia took advantage. So until Cincinnati can prove it, I'm not picking Cincinnati ahead of West Virginia. I don't care that they have the returners that they do have, although I do think Sorsby, Evan Pryor at running back, I really like their tight end and Joe Royer, and how many years is Dante Corleone going to have eligibility for? So West Virginia doesn't play Cincinnati. They played them, 3 years in a row, or 2 years back-to-back, so not on the schedule for this season, but I would love to beat on the Bearcats for another year. So I think even with all of the turnover West Virginia's had, they're going to be better. That's ultimately, this is where I can kind of take a pause now here and say is, do you think West Virginia will be better on the offensive side of the ball with Neil Brown's conservative play and primitive play calling, or Rich Rodriguez's system back? Do you think West Virginia has comparable talent coming back offensively as they do a year ago? I don't know necessarily on the line. We're going to have to talk about that in the position breakdown. But I think the system's going to dictate a lot. I think what West Virginia added in Cam Vaughn at wide receiver is going to be helpful, but who's their number 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver, to compare it to a Traylon Ray or, say, a Justin Robinson from last year? Can Jaden Bray, Rodney Gallagher step up in that regard? Can Jahiem White finally be completely unleashed as the number 1 starter, even though it still might be a 1A to a 1B with Jalen Knighton around, but more so than what he had when C.J. Donaldson might have been the 1A or 1B there. And then is Nico Marchiol in 2025 a better quarterback than what we saw out of Garrett Green in 2024? I'm going to say absolutely, if his offensive line can protect him. So that's how I feel. And defensively, they can't be any worse than what we saw out of that secondary. That secondary was the worst secondary I've seen since the 2012 Pat Miller defense. So with Shadon Brown gone, with Jordan Leslie gone, I think you can totally find, there's only where to go but up. Now, in their front 7 on the defensive line and secondary, I really liked what West Virginia had, especially on the defensive line with T.J. Jackson this past year. I think Fatorma Mulba played up to his potential in his last year's worth of eligibility, and you did have Sean Martin, who didn't light the world on fire, but was serviceable at times. So can they be as good or better on that defensive line? I think they will, so simply because the defense will be more aggressive. You're not going to have a bandit who just sits there and kind of outside zone contain anymore, like Tyron Bradley had to do for so long, or before him, the offense, Barrett. Oh man, that JB. He was the outside linebacker for West Virginia for so long. They played at Cincinnati last year. Name escapes me off the top of my head, but so that's some of the reasons why. I think the secondary aggressiveness disguised looks, and if they can force turnovers. So the secondary can't be any worse than it was a year ago, so it's only going to be better. So this was all in all a West Virginia team that went 6-7 last year. So I'm saying that this is going to be a team that's going to be 6-7 again or better in 2025. So that puts them now above all of the teams that I've mentioned to this point in time. And accounting this kind of last quarter of the league, I think it's Houston, Oklahoma State, UCF, and Arizona. Houston, I just will believe it when I see it with them. I don't think they're a Power 4 program. I don't. I think that they were the weakest of the 4 ads from the G6 at that point in time. I think Tom Herman kind of had a 1-year, 2-year wonder down there for them that got them on the precipice of playing in the college football playoff or kind of like that point in time. So I know Willie Fritz had, a good year at Tulane a couple of years ago. Might be a guy that can make them a little bit interesting in some regard defensively. But what did they go out there but sign some journeyman Connor Wegman from Texas A&M who really didn't do much during his time in College Station, and they had some other transfer portal losses to bigger programs that just poached them. So I'm not buying Houston just yet. I think that could be a road win that West Virginia gets revenge on from a couple of seasons ago, even though Dana Holgorsen isn't there. I'm not buying them yet. Oklahoma State, had a lot of roster turnover just like West Virginia did, but I don't think they kind of spent and got some of the quality players that West Virginia did. West Virginia doesn't play the Cowboys in 2025, so I'm not necessarily as worried about them. But West Virginia crushed them in Stillwater this past year, so I see West Virginia still ahead. I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes in that program from an NIL standpoint. Maybe they've corrected some things. They've had some other donors step up to the plate in certain respects. They've had some new coordinator hires around Mike Gundy. But is Mike Gundy, one of the things that he's not relating to Gen Z players of today? There's a lot. There's a lot that I could unpack, I feel like, about Oklahoma State, but that's kind of just my Reader's Digest version. So if there's a program that I feel like can make that kind of like worst to first or kind of flip that Arizona State had, Oklahoma State's definitely a program who can do that. I think Utah similarly can contend for a conference championship, but I don't know. I think they might need a year to get back to stability before they try and contend again. So far, I just don't see it without as much strength at the skill positions that Oklahoma has traditionally had over time. UCF, I think, is in complete rebuild. Scott Frost, can he recreate the magic a second time, similarly like Rich Rodriguez is going to do at West Virginia? I don't know. I don't know the way that they roster build. Is there enough talent there to contend? Again, I think this is another borderline Power 4 program. This has almost got me on like a separate tangent of like how we've added so many through conference realignment programs or moved around programs that aren't deserved to be, like why Rutgers in the Big Ten, why Maryland, and they're cashing in on these huge checks but have never been like a huge player in college football. So like again, Houston and UCF deserving to be in this Big 12. I just don't know. And then Arizona, when I open up my book, my Lindy's magazine, and I see Aiden Garnes projected as cornerback, a starting cornerback for Arizona, that's all I need to know. That's all I need to know, that Arizona is still going to be terrible on the defensive side of the ball. Jacob Manu's gone. It's Noah Fafita and a bunch of different just like, cast-offs. They don't have Teteroa McMillan anymore, so they're not threatening in that regard through the air. Fafita can run all over the ball, all over the field like he wants and just play backyard football. I don't know if that's necessarily as good for his, pro potential, but at his size, I don't think he has much pro potential anyway. So he's just trying to cash in. And if they unloaded, their NIL war chest to keep him, then he's just a junior, so he could still go play somewhere else as a senior. I don't know the decision there. I don't think Brent Brennan's the guy for Arizona, but Arizona's never been, some sort of perennial conference championship contending program. So I think they're a bit in flux. I think they kind of peaked there, for the time being under Jed Fish a couple of seasons ago. So that's kind of why I'm picking them last. So I've gone over an hour. I'm sure you're probably not listening to me for over an hour, but if you have tuned in from beginning to end, wow, thank you. Really appreciate you staying locked in for this long. I'll come back later this week. Again, do that offensive breakdown, defensive breakdown to talk about this 2025 team and what I think about, schematically, systematically, and then from a roster standpoint at the different position groups. Love to know your thoughts on this video, good, bad, or indifferent. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. Thanks you so much for tuning in. Love having all of you give your feedback to these videos and getting to engage with you here on YouTube. And we'll have more to talk about as we gear up for this kickoff. Can't wait for August 30th against our RMU. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hail West Virginia. Let's go spot the ball.